So with that, I invite Karen to come on stage. Thank you for coming out tonight, Karen.
Thank you for having me, Karina.
And we can use that if you want.
Hello. Isn't this a nice location? I mean, for those who have been at the other downtown site and coming here, I think this is such a great space for innovation, incubators, and so on. So again, thank you, Karina, for having me here. So I want to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is all about governance and process improvement and federal leaders really getting ready for the cloud. And even those who are in cloud migration, kind of what they can do with regards to governance, integration, and delivery. Oh, so what do I? Okay. So topic, what do CIOs need to know about governance, integration, and delivery of cloud computing? One of the things that I note most of with federal leaders is that there's still this kind of scariness about jumping in to the deep end. And what does it mean for agencies trying to get into cloud and cloud migration? Interestingly enough, there's about a third of federal CIOs that really don't even have a documented cloud strategy. So without that, the challenging thing is, where do they start? Some of them are trying to figure out, what do they do with their data? What do they do with their applications? How do they rationalize? How do they actually get into a decision framework? No standards are necessarily in place. And so it's kind of like, where do we really begin? So I like to talk about cloud readiness, and actually Karina and I were talking about something called Cloud Readiness Playbook, which I think would actually be a really good sell. I think it's something that people need when they're trying to figure out, how do I start? Most of the times, I would say the biggest thing is trying to figure out where you fit in regards to a lot of areas, be it security. Everybody's heard about FedRAMP and compliance with that. So what does that mean? That's a very daunting topic. How do you fit into your network infrastructure? And how much money are you spending on keeping up your data centers with storage cost, with network infrastructure cost, as I said before, application inventory, and what does it mean when you're getting into change management? So a lot of that is in line of, am I really ready to be migrating into the cloud? And then what type of cloud services are you talking about? Most agencies now have somewhat of a mixed bag, whether they're talking about solutions as a service, infrastructure, platform as a service, and decisions that go along with all of that. Where is your data going to be housed? How do you have access to it? What does PII look like? What are the legalities around accessing and the multi-cloud environment? So here's just a quick cloud service model. Most of the agencies that really are restrictive, and we know who they are, they need to be in the private cloud, where they have the privacy of their own community. And that's fine, but a lot of agencies, depending on the information that they're trying to move into, are moving into public cloud. I know that was something that, for me, as a former federal CIO, I didn't want to immediately leap into moving my financials or HR, but I definitely viewed that we could be into the public cloud community. And if not, even better, a hybrid of sorts, where you've got the best of both worlds in the public and the private. So why talk about IT governance? Well, for me, it's all about trying to figure out how to move out of this chaotic space and how to streamline with service delivery. You're trying to, first of all, get control of the IT organization, right? And with that in itself is hard to do. So how do you go about doing that? And how do you go about coming in as a federal CIO and really sitting at the table with your financial, your Chico, your CFO, being a partner with the business leaders. So the good news, I think, for CIOs and CISOs is that we are at the table today. The challenging thing is, while we are enablers, how do we really get in and understand the business and be able to say that your information, you're trusted. And oh, by the way, I am going to help govern and have standards by which we roll out delivery models. So what I think is that why IT governance is that it enables cloud migration and it puts in a repeatable, ongoing cycle. So part of what I thought about, even as the CIO, was how did we get into adoption of cloud? We had a lot of drivers. So I will share this with you. When I came in 2009 into the Obama administration, we were coming off of what was the most heavily run social media campaign, right? I call Obama the technology president. Everybody has a name. He was the technology president. And quite honestly, it was interesting because when he first came in, he wanted a BlackBerry. It's kind of funny thinking back about that was the mobile device of choice. And he wanted one. And he got told no by U.S. Secret Service, White House Communications Agency, National Security Council. And we were in Office of Administration. And we said, that's what he wants. That's what he's going to get. And trust me, there were ways to lock it down, but he really wanted to have that. I came in, and I'd come from Navy, and I thought that the White House probably would have the most neatest, gee whiz, wang bag, products. That was false. That was not true. There were very antiquated systems in place, and no fault of anybody else. It wasn't Bush 43's fault. It was just that prior to Obama coming in, we had to make some multiple leaps in terms of building up a base. We actually, and we worked very close with Microsoft, we actually had to deploy several platforms of exchange. We went from 2003, 2007, 2010, 2013, in 5 years. That's a lot. And we did it, but we did it with some governance structure. So when you're looking at things like drivers, again, defining policies, ensuring that you have a comprehensive cloud strategy is key. So going down each and every one of those, it's who's your cloud team? Who are the people that are really going to help migrate you and establish this? And who are going to be your providers and service providers? Depending on what you want, you could be in DevOps, you could be on Gmail. GSA was out early on that. You can be in Salesforce and CRM. Who are your providers? And then as you're looking at it, how do you identify with your framework? What are the type of skill sets that you need, whether it's architecture, what are the desired services that you're looking at, and the policies and procedures? And what type of cloud environment are you? Are we going to be consumers? Are we going to be brokers? Are we going to be managers? Those are all really keys to deciding. I think governance is even more needed when you are in a multi-cloud environment, like some agencies are finding themselves today. They may be, as I said, in DevOps using a certain cloud provider. They may be on Azure. They may be on AWS. Again, how do you manage that? How do you govern that? And without governance, I would submit to you that you run the risk of security issues, that you could have potentially loss of data, whether it's non-compliance or running over budget. Who's really managing that and who's paying attention to that? And a well-managed cloud environment, you have to move out of your traditional procedures. So for me, I had to start very traditional, right? We had 2 data centers. We originally had all of our information in one. So that was really bad. I spent countless times, countless hours. If we went down, we were on the phone, on call, till we brought everything back up. And this was just the unclassed side. Never mind the classified side. So we were running a very traditional camp until we could actually beef up the platform, get some governance in place, and then eventually move to the cloud. But that took every bit of about the 5 years that I was there. With regards to the environment, you have to establish policies and establish a multi-provider ecosystem. So I want to give an example of governance moving into platform as a service. One of the things that we did, and we had to get to be a trusted help desk. We had people who had a script, they knew all the applications, they served very specific parts of the White House, whether it was OMB, whether it was U.S. Trade Office, whether it was the First Lady office, and they were akin, the way I set it up was, they actually worked in those business units. So they were all part of my help desk, but they lived and breathed, and they were really customer service. So they understood the business that they worked in. And I got to a point where we got really good at this in terms of understanding their business, shoring up, knowing the applications that they needed, and really providing excellent service. Because in the beginning, we had all these shadow IT organizations. Nobody really wanted to come and work with us until we really could prove ourselves. So how do you go from, in about 2.5 years, building up a very solid help desk to now giving that ownership and responsibility back to the customer? Moving to something like ServiceNow, where the customer can track each and every aspect of their ticket and feel pretty confident that they're going to get good customer service. So I think we were going from what I call myself, I think I was more of a draconian. I was on copy to everything. I tracked all the trends. I knew if we were meeting SLAs, I incorporated SLAs in my own team. So when you're actually putting in place governance into PAS and trying to do self-service enablement, how do you go from that? How do you go from like keeping the responsibility and now that you've built a winning trust with customers, transfer it over? And I think some of the key decisions are here. You need to really figure out, are we going to be provisioning? Are we going to give access? Are we going to have the autonomy? Are we going to be more controlling? What does it mean when you're talking about standardization versus innovation, versus a person actually going in, identifying what they need, whether it's an application or a service, or I need Tableau because this is what I'm working on. How do you go from that, and how do you enable self-service? So those are the kinds of things that I would say that we really, really struggled with, but we were able to get out because we wanted to put responsibility onto the user. We wanted the user to be able to track what they needed. And ultimately, we winded up moving ServiceNow to a bigger platform. We had HR using it, we had facilities, but we had to start off with IT because everybody was afraid about moving into something that was, number one, on the cloud and was like a self-service enablement. So that actually happened, and it winded up being, I would say, a true benefit to the overarching organization. Now, here's my group. I created what we called was our strategic plan. At first, it started off as PIE, because that was really easy to remember. Everybody knows the PIE. Everybody gets that: preservation, innovation, efficiency. And then it became PIEs, or SPIEs, because we added stabilization. We had to. It was really an issue with stabilizing. So I define all of those areas that we had as part of, and so this was our strategic roadmap. It was stabilize. Can we make sure that we have a durable architecture, a solid foundation in place? Preservation, cybersecurity. I had a really, really great team of government and contractors that supported in our SOC and in our NOC. Part of what we did was we actually incorporated them to work together. Imagine that, because they were totally separate. How many places do you see that, where the NOC is on one side, the SOC is on another? We were really working on having reliable, trusted technology. Because if you can imagine, we were at the pointy end of the spear. If somebody were trying to come after Valerie Jarrett, it was really easy to try to target her, the chief of staff, never mind the principals, the president, the vice president. We see it today, obviously, as we're talking about our intel. So that had to be as solid as it could be. And then innovation. What were we doing about collaborating? We were doing things like moving whitehouse.gov into open source and really putting the responsibility so that constituents could come in and actually petition the White House. That had never been done before. So these are the things that we put in our strategic roadmap. And then efficiency, making sure that we were promoting organizational change, but we were doing it in an agile way with things like CRM. So when we had these 4 areas, I would say we would actually go off every 3 months, and I used to call it kind of like making the sausage. Each and every one of the leaders in those groups had to report out. They had metrics, they had numbers, and this is all what I mean around governance. I'll give you an example of what we talked about. So stabilization, we gave our data center names. I don't know why, but Dakota and Mohawk. And we actually would talk about the throughput of messages. We tracked records. We were part of the Presidential Records Act, so everything that was part of PRA had to be captured and duplicated because all of that goes to NARA at the end. We tracked if we were doing a health check on the equipment, because I don't need to tell you, there was dated, antiquated equipment. This is why our systems were going down. This is why we weren't trusted. This is why there were so many shadow IT organizations with the parts of the agencies that had the money and could actually go and hire and do what they needed to do. So stabilization, it required that governance and that focus, because if we were going to do anything to try to move off and really then entrust the cloud service provider to take over, we had to first off get the responsibility and get the platform up to speed. The next area was preservation, and this kind of focuses on, you could see the numbers that we were tracking. We were tracking things like viruses and how our defense systems were blocking, and where it was being caught in the whole cyber kill chain. Because I had to know that, because I had to know how much to invest in the tools. If something was getting beyond some of the tools, then I would be asking my deputy or my CISO, why is that? Or if we track down to the staffing. We know about supply and demand, especially of our cyber experts. So each and every quarter, this is the kind of information that we were looking at, and we would actually go off an entire day. I'd take my leadership, and we would actually look at these numbers. And if they weren't meeting their metrics, why is that? I actually brought in my director a couple of times, because what I did is I created a dashboard. I figured she needed to see this information whenever she needed to, at any day. And then the last one I'll share with you is on innovation. So this was interesting because we would track the data that was coming out of whitehouse.gov, the site visits, who came to the sites, and how constituents were actually getting information. You know, our big Super Bowl used to be like the State of the Union. That was it for us. And nowadays, people aren't sitting in their living rooms watching that. What are you on? You're on mobile, right? You're anywhere, any place, anytime, checking out what's going on. But more so, when something would play out, as it does on the State of the Union, you would see instant feed in comparison. Let's say we were talking about the earnings of women compared to men in the same positions. We'd show those numbers, and that would be split screen right on the State of the Union, because it would come out that this was just real-time data. And so we wanted to look at the high volumes of traffic. Who was coming to whitehouse.gov? What were they coming for? What kind of information? This is the type of information that we always looked at. The petitions. What were the? It's kind of funny looking back on this, because this is I'm taking you all back to 2014, 2013. But what were the popular petitions? And then the applications, because we were building applications in my team. So I submit to you that I think when we finally got good and had some solid governance, it was challenging to try to relinquish it, identify good partners with cloud service providers, and feel that we weren't going to be the ones totally responsible, but that it was a partnership that we were getting into. And this came from a groundswell of having a solid governing structure and being able to show that we were good at delivery. So part of the cloud path, I would say, to governance is really putting in and enabling your team. I got to a point where I had to move from being draconian and just give the responsibility back to all of my directors, and to actually sit down and talk about what we were going to move to the cloud. So ServiceNow might have been an easy one, and it was somewhat, because we knew we ultimately wanted to get out of that space. We wanted to not be the ones managing, but actually get into like being consumers and trusting that we had solid policies in place. So part of it is looking at what do you want in terms of your access today, and what are your future targets, and what are your policies and positionings for strategy. The guardrails, and this is actually, I pulled this from Gartner, because it actually symbolizes a lot of what we tried to follow. What are the guardrails that you have in place around things like identity, around financial controls? Because there's a lot that you have to figure out with responsibility of finances and who owns the data. And it's actually really cool. Nobody wants to move legacy into cloud, right? You want to kind of move the cool stuff into the cloud as you're talking about it. So we were moving to CRM. We actually worked very closely with Salesforce when we were doing that. And I was so sick and tired of people coming to the White House, and this is not a joke, U.S. Secret Service would pull out the big old Excel spreadsheet because Joe Montgomery was coming to visit from, Middle America, Ohio, and we just could not do any better than to track on paper. I couldn't believe this is the White House. What are you talking about? So we wanted to work on actually identifying anyone, any package, any delivery, any gift that had come in. If Union XYZ in Kentucky was invited, did they actually come? And what did they come for? So we wanted to track all of that. So it was really neat being able to work with our procurement, get an agile contract, and actually move that information and have that in the cloud. I said that was an exciting one because it wasn't about legacy, but it was about doing something meaningful that hit a lot of the offices. So deciding that, putting in those guardrails, and really figuring out what policies that you want to have in place and what type of compliance is going to be there. Now, the thing with governance is once you get started, it's that continuous life cycle. Reviewing the goals that you set forth to begin with, what operating programs and what you have established in your architecture, implementing those guardrails, you have to continuously check on that. What type of controls you have. Something might change. Something could change in the environment. IRS got dinged because they didn't have multi-factor authentication, right? How many folks lost information and so they got dinged for that. So they changed that. But when you implement that change, you've got to, again, review your policies and whatever platform changes that you make. What type of guidelines, and are you being most efficient and effective? So I'm going to share with you what I believe, this is an actual cloud migration strategic roadmap for a federal CIO. What I love about this roadmap is that while it has all of the foundational information about security, architecture, and networks, along the lines you can tell that it's got all these different focus areas. So the question is, are we going to be consumers? Are we managers or cloud providers? And within each and every area, it kind of has a focus point because as the consumer, it's actually migrating legacy apps. And it's going through selecting, prioritizing your applications, developing an approach, and actually your whole deployment migration. As a cloud manager, it's actually putting in place things like a marketplace for things like web and applications. And how do those matter depending on the different providers? And you have actually a value statement for each area. And then you get into the cloud provider, which is the internal component. How do you identify with internal cloud models? And how do you develop software controls, things like ICAM? How do you do that? So it took 3 different levels, but it pretty much laid it out, the roles and responsibilities of cloud adoption. And this is what, you get to this point, having a strategic roadmap, when you have had solid governance in place. And you've actually done the work internally, but now you're establishing your future state, which for this CIO was really getting into Agile, moving into the economic benefits of an effective cloud strategy. So this is what, at the end of the day, this is what you want, and this is where you want to position yourself moving into the cloud. I would end with my recommendations for how you get to a position of decision here. And part of it is really empowering this cross-sectional team. I had members of my team, not only from my office, but even when we would have our off-site governance, I'd have a section of the time when I'd invite in some users who would give us the real feedback. And I mean, sometimes it didn't start off well. It later got better, but having an opportunity, think about it, when you want to reach out to your customers and get real feedback at a time when, you know, things are not going good, that's actually the best time to hear ways that you can improve. So getting that cross-sectional governance team in place and clearly being able to communicate from an organization perspective, what are our risks? What are our considerations? How do we get business unit buy-in? Developing governance principles, it's part of identifying the service areas that make the most sense for cloud migration And like I said, for us, some of it was on the application side, some of it was internally in our help desk and servicing to our customers. Some of those things made the most sense. We weren't going to go and start to move financial information into the cloud. We weren't going to start to move a lot of our HR information, but we had to take baby steps. And in some cases, we took some solid steps that really were impactful to our business organizations. And then also compliance and financial requirements. What does a cloud service provider provide? What actually is that? What does it mean? Where does the data reside? Who has the responsibility for that? And contractual considerations. Whether you're talking about liabilities, again, data ownership, data breaches, really understand that carefully, because I think those are some of the things that get in the way of being concerned about migrating to the cloud, and having trusted partners with your CSPs to really explain to you what that means is, I think, very critical. And certainly a continuous review, because things change. And you're going to need to go down the path of what, based on something that may have changed in your network, something that may change with responsibility, something that may change with your data. What does that mean, again, with your relationship with your CSP and your contract? So with that, I would love to hear from you what questions that you have for me, or questions about anything that we went through with trying to move to the cloud, or just even questions in general about being at the White House.
You had mentioned that nobody, wants to take those legacy applications, and move them to the cloud. But I was curious, especially at the White House, did you get pressure to take something that was just so old and would have been maybe not the best choice to move to the cloud and move it to the cloud just because, internally that's what somebody wanted, or that's, the squeaky wheel was pushing for that?
That's a good question. Actually, no. I didn't get that pressure. Probably because people were trying to figure out how to do things new and innovative. We had a camp of folks who really had never worked for the federal government. So they were not used to the bureaucratic answer. They really wanted to do innovative things like building apps, like moving to CRM. So like I said, it's kind of easy to pick up the shiny new thing and move. Now, in the background, yes, I did have to go through app rationalization, and it's hard because you do have applications that are redundant. You, unfortunately, have things that are run on, and it could be COBOL, Fortran, all this antiquated stuff, but you do have it, and trying to figure out how to forklift that up and move it, it was difficult. Some of that work definitely did have to be done, but it wasn't that we necessarily had pressure from any of the agencies to do that. Other thoughts, questions?
Excellent talk. Quick question about the cultural change that comes with going to the cloud. Most of the people are used to working with data centers and touching the machines. How did that cultural change come about, and what part of that was most challenging for you as a CIO?
That's a really good question, because yes, we love to hug our servers. I think, in fact, we were very, very motivated, when we finally did get another data center up and running, and we could full-time, go from, we could actually test the waters and see that we could go down and go back up in real time. That became a critical piece. But I think for us, one of the things was, how do we get efficient and get into moving out of the data center space? the hardened data center and actually start to get into cloud services and look at things like mobile device management and ServiceNow. I think it was hard, but the culture change is this. You have people who get good in their positions and they start to think like, wait a minute, I'm not going to have a job. What does this mean? Part of it is actually identifying for your workforce and your team what the future holds for them, other opportunities. And so I think I adopted kind of the Wayne Gretzky skate to the future. Where's the puck going? And I really implored upon them to do this and to learn new skills and to move into kind of we tried to be, an innovative shop. And I think people started to get excited about that. So it really was a cultural change.
Any other questions? No, I was going to ask, as a former CIO in government and a whole career in government, now you're with LMI, and you're meeting with customers daily. What's the common obstacle when setting up governance with with the customer base you have today?
That's a good question also, Karina. Well, again, I think sometimes people are, where do I start? It has this connotation of I'm going to be like the hammer, right? As opposed to this is really going to give you more time to move into smooth operations. Who doesn't like, having a dashboard set up where all the pertinent information that you need for the day, be it operations, that you have it at your hand. So part of the conversation is, with me anyway, is I'll tell people, believe me, I've been on the 2 a.m. phone call on a Saturday night. You're trying to get out of that space. I want to help you because a lot of federal leaders really want to be in more of a strategic space. So I'm trying to give you back part of your day. I'm trying to give you, we talk about these 5, 6, 7-day work weeks. I'm trying to give them back that. And so we have that real conversation about what's taking up the majority of their time. I think it's really easy to be in the operational tactical space because it's sort of like wolf closest to the sled. Think about you're on the Iditarod and you're looking at the wolf in front of you. But really taking the time to be present and be mindful and be strategic is a conversation that I have quite often, and to help people focus and get into that space by clearing off the deck. So that's really where I try to drive the conversation.
Great. Thank you. That was amazing.
Thanks a lot.
We got one more question.
Hi. Probably pretty new to cloud, so excuse me if it's a very novice question, but as a very traditional data center user, so I know cloud has everything like data center does, and it has more than that, and there are a lot of reasons why people would want to move to cloud. So what are the reasons that people don't want to move to cloud? Are there limitations in the cloud, or is there specific things that people want to stick with the data center? There are certain things that they cannot do in cloud, but they can do with the data center. So is there any specific reasons people just I don't want to use the cloud because of these reasons, because I'm used to this and I don't want to do that?
Well, I think a lot of times it may be the protection of the data access, who has it, who do I call, keeper of the keys. And a lot of times you hear this from folks that may be in the DoD space or the Intel space. But the answer to that may be a private cloud. There are still ways around some of that. So a lot of it is that responsibility of having the ownership and not wanting to relinquish it and not realizing the flexibility of kind of being a consumer and getting out of that, what that will do. So there are a lot of ways about having that conversation with agency leaders who are still stuck. The other driver, of course, is that comes from OMB about reducing your data centers, even costing it out. So there are drivers to get them into positions of moving towards the cloud. It's just having the conversations about what is the best setup for them whether it is private or even hybrid.
Another generic question. So what is next to cloud? I mean, in IT, everything has a life cycle, right?
What
so
is the next thing?
what's the life cycle for cloud? Like, do you think that's the future that's
What
going to
is
stay
it?
for long? Is there something new on the,
Well, I mean, we're talking about artificial intelligence. We're talking about machine learning. We're talking about, quantum theories. We're talking about business intelligence. So these are the things that are really on the, not really on the horizon. They're things that are going on right now. So that I think agencies are trying to figure out and trying to work with. Yeah.
Thank you, Karen.